Beyond this, I explore a number of concepts using, they're difficult concepts, and they link into history and into my own life. But in exploring them, I've deliberately used the shapes of childhood because I want to tell story. I profoundly believe that contemporary abstract art has all too often let people down because of its lack of emotion, its lack of spirituality, its lack of story, and lack of paint. So I wanted to take people by the hand and use very simple shapes to explore some of these psychological and historical and sociological themes. And it is the concept of dialecticism. The notion, it was a Marxian and Hegelian notion that society operated in a certain way, that they believed, Marx believed that he was a scientist, and like water boiling at 100 degrees centigrade, he had worked out the way in which all human beings interact, worked out the way that all economies work, and he also believed that the capitalist system had within it the seeds of its own destruction. Now, dialecticism gives you a fantastic way of viewing the world and analysing the world, and it is a beautiful concept. In many ways, it's right, and in many ways, it's wrong. And it was perverted during the course of the Russian Revolution by Stalin, who, among other things, apart from slaughtering his own people, he also used it to marginalise art, to turn art into propaganda. So it is a very enlightening concept, and a very difficult one, and it was perverted as well by the people who deployed it. What I wanted to show here was that what happened in the 19th and 20th centuries was actually a very much more refined way of experiencing the world and working out how we as human beings operated. So I wanted them to be very, very strong, but also always with my concepts, my take on the history of time, if you like, is I see good and bad. And in the dialectic, I see good and I see bad. So the way that the strength of the concept, because it is one of the most powerful concepts in the history of the world, is reflected in the heavy lines and the deductive nature of it. Because Marx and Hegel would have said, you do X, you get Y. There is no room for doubt. There is no room for God. They believed that they had cracked it all. Of course, they hadn't. And what I'm showing here is that the dialectic can be very good and very powerful. It can shed light and shed dark. And when I painted this, I wanted it to be in the center as thick and as heavy as possible. So what I've done here is I've always used a knife, very heavy oil paint, yacht varnish, metal paint, metal filings, sand, and lacquer. And also what I do is fire on the canvas using a blowtorch to create yet again another layer of depth. Beyond that, and this period here is very autobiographical because not only did it historically link to the 19th and 20th centuries, it also reflects the period after my father died, when we went through enormous economic hardship, and when I lived in a world where I was told in a very dialectical way, people like you are poor, and you have to live in a certain way, and that there was no room for debate or manoeuvre. So mixing history and personal experience. The second concept, which links actually to the concept that Max Weber, the great sociologist, identified. It's a very postmodern state. It is the state of anomie, where there is a breakdown and looseness of community. It's good and bad. It's the state of the breakdown of community that was seen in the run-up to the arrival of Nazism. And it's a state of community that's seen often in modern societies, where there is atomization and a disconnection between social structures and people. But also, it has a beauty, it has a fluidity. It's much less tight than the tight thinking of the dialectic. It can be not a great place to live because it's anchorless, but equally, with it comes liberation. It is the social structure and the psychological structure of the postmodern existentialist state. Good and bad. As always with me, it's good and bad. The next concept that I wanted to explore and illustrate was the concept of alienation. In a dialectical frame of mind, and also in an anomic state of mind, you experience alienation. All human beings experience alienation to some degree at different times in their lives. I used here the triangle because I wanted to express some thoughts about alienation, but to do it in a beautiful way, because I believe that all concepts have beauty, and even the most difficult concepts, if you approach them in the right way, you can see good and bad in them, and they don't have to be expressed in an ugly way. The concept here is to express and illustrate the marginality that comes with living in an alienated state of consciousness. So I wanted to have, if you like, a beautiful but sick triangle, a corrupted triangle. So you see lines within lines within lines, and you see the baseline being overflowed, bled. This is the most difficult place to live in an alienated state of consciousness. It is marginality. I lived in a state of marginality. I was an Irish immigrant. My mother never fitted into British society because she didn't want to. After the death of my father, we were very poor and we were treated very badly because we had no power. And so, even though I was very good at school, I felt that that I was different. I knew I was different. I came to love that difference because I embraced the existential qualities that come when you live in an alienated state of consciousness. But it's a development, and it takes time, and it takes some courage.